Hello and welcome to my weekly podcast through the Bible in 10 years. Today we're going to continue our look at the book of Hebrews in chapter 2. And I have interlinearbible.org up if you're watching the video version of this on YouTube. Let's go ahead and begin with verse 1, of course. Chapter 1 of Hebrews I've likened to a celebration. Jesus has accomplished atonement. He is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, majesty in the heavens, as Hebrews says. He is enthroned as King. He is enthroned as Son of God, as Lord, as Christ. And he now, we celebrate this. It is accomplished. It is finished. And so chapter 2 begins with, now what is the takeaway from this? Hebrews, as George Guthrie pointed out so long ago, alternates between teaching and preaching. If chapter 1 is teaching of a sort, although it's really more hymnic, I think, in flavor, more celebratory, it still proclaims in what we might call exposition that Jesus is exalted above the angels. And I suggested in my video on 1:5 through 14 that this connection to the angels may have something to do with the fact that angels were stewards of the first covenant, the old covenant, whereas Jesus is the inaugurator and mediator of the new covenant. We're going to see this in a second, very quickly here. And so, chapter 2, verse 1, then we interrupt this train of thought to give you an exhortation. So, exposition, exhortation, exposition, exhortation. So if Hebrews 1 is exposition, then Hebrews 2 begins with 4 verses of exhortation or preaching. So let's look at verse 1 here. On account of this, because of what I've said in chapter 1, it is necessary more abundantly, more exceedingly, to hold fast, for us, to hold fast to the things that have been heard, lest we should drift away. So you get the train of thought here, I think. If Jesus is really this great, if Jesus is really Son of God, Lord and Christ, then we better pay attention. I don't know about you, but there is a human tendency. You pay attention to people who are thought to be important. I've noticed this, unfortunately, even with regard to myself. If somebody thinks that I'm important some way to them, maybe they think that I'm going to take a certain position, or maybe they see my title, or maybe they think that I have some inroads to somebody that they want to know. It's interesting when people think that you're important, they pay attention to you. And then, of course, I've also uh, been there when people find out I'm not important. And it is interesting how people, and again, I'm not saying that people even necessarily do this intentionally, but I've then kind of felt the kind of vacuum of post importance. So I was dean of a seminary for 6 years, and you get emails, you get people sending you their resumes. You have people who treat you nice because they think you have power. They think you can get me somewhere. Again, I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. It's very human. And then I went back to teaching, and all that just went away. It's really funny in a way how people pay attention to you, even if they don't like you. They pretend to like you if you're powerful, or they think you're powerful. Well, Jesus is not only powerful, he really is powerful. That is, it's not just he seems powerful. It's not just he seems important. Jesus is pretty big deal. He's greater than the angels. Now, I don't know about you, but if an angel, appeared to me like an angel appeared to Balaam's donkey, I would take notice if I saw an angel. I think I pay attention, Ken. Sometimes my mind wanders, but if I were to see an angel, I think I would pay attention. Well, Hebrews 1 indicates that Jesus is far, far greater than the angels. We should pay attention to this. And this is a theme we will see over and over again in Hebrews. You could argue, and George Guthrie argues this, that the teaching of Hebrews builds. You can almost take the preaching out and you have a train of thought, a continuous argument of sorts in Hebrews 1 through the middle part of chapter 10. The preaching or the exhortation tends to reiterate the same point over and over again. And the same point is you need to keep going. You need to endure. You need to have faith. You need to watch. You need to take heed here. And the reason is because if you don't, you're in great danger. Let me just say Hebrews has no doctrine of eternal security. Quite the opposite. The doctrine of Hebrews is if we don't keep running, we're not going to finish. If we don't keep running, we're going to be right there with everybody else who faces the wrath of God on the day of judgment. Hebrews has no place for, as long as you said the prayer, you're okay. Not Hebrews. In fact, when we get to chapter 6, we will deal with it's a difficult passage because it sure sounds like if you fall away, there's no hope. You can't even get back. We'll talk about that when we get to chapter 6 in a few weeks. But here we are in the first of these interruptions, the first of these exhortations, where basically the author says Jesus is important. Jesus is hot stuff. You better pay attention. You better take heed. You better hold fast, because if you drift away, that's a problem. Verse 2, for if the having been spoken through angels word, if the word that was spoken through angels was firm, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense, verse 3, then how will we ourselves escape if we should neglect such a great salvation, which received its beginning of speaking through the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard him. All right, let's go back to verse 2. What is the word having been spoken through angels? Well, it's the Old Testament law. It's the first covenant. I mentioned last week, or the last chapter, that there are a number of places in the New Testament where it's clear that Jews at the time of Christ, including many Christian Jews, saw angels as the mediators of the law to Moses. Paul talks about this in Galatians 3. Stephen talks about this in Acts 7. See, where else? It seems like there's another place, here in Hebrews. So there are several places in the New Testament where it's clear that at least many Jews believed that the first covenant was mediated through angels. This is one possible reason why Hebrews 1 contrasts Jesus with the angels, to show that just as Jesus was superior and is superior to the angels, so the new covenant is superior to the old covenant. The old covenant being associated with angels. By the way, Hebrews does not trash the first covenant. We would be misreading Hebrews if we read Hebrews to say the Old Testament was bonkers, the Old Testament was evil. The author of Hebrews is not a Gnostic. The first word was firm. In fact, in the first covenant, every transgression and disobedience received a punishment, and that was appropriate. It was a just punishment. The argument here is not a bad good, old covenant bad, new covenant good. The argument here is lesser to greater. It's what we call a a fortiori argument, or a a minore ad maiorem argument, from lesser to greater. Calva Homer. It's a argument that, yes, the first covenant was pretty significant. So you can imagine. So the train of thought here is, if punishment was bad under the first covenant, then punishment will be horrible under the new covenant, because Jesus is greater than the angels. So if those who violated the angel-given covenant received a punishment, then those who violate the Jesus-given covenant are really in big trouble. That's the train of thought here. It's an argument from lesser to greater. And again, the angels are associated with the giving of the law. Verse 3, how will we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? And of course, who in their right mind would neglect salvation? I mean, who doesn't want to escape the wrath of God? And again, in the New Testament, in Paul and such, we should think of salvation as rescue from the coming judgment, the bad part of the judgment. And so how will we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? Jesus has given us this great escape. Why would we neglect it? Why would we go to something else? And of course, in the case of Hebrews, the something else is the Levitical sacrificial system, atonement provided by the temple, by the earthly system. Why would we neglect this escape? God has given us an escape. Why would we neglect it? Why would we try to do the things that will not lead to our escape? And Hebrews is going to argue later on that the animal sacrifices of the old covenant simply did not take away sins. They didn't. Not one of the Old Testament sacrifices actually took away sins, according to Hebrews. Only Jesus' offering and sacrifice took away sins. So this salvation received its beginning to be spoken by the Lord, that is by Jesus. Jesus came to earth and Jesus spoke of the salvation that was coming. And Hebrews says it was confirmed to us by those who heard Jesus. This is interesting. The author of Hebrews is anonymous. We will be tracking little clues here and there as to who the author of Hebrews might have been. This is a very significant comment because it suggests that the author of Hebrews does not claim to be an eyewitness. The author of Hebrews does not claim to be an eyewitness of Jesus. But he was the author, and I do think it's a he. We'll get to that eventually in chapter 11. The author of Hebrews received word about Jesus secondhand. By the way, this is a very strong argument against Paul being the author of Hebrews. The Greek style is not Paul's. The Greek style of Hebrews does not match any of Paul's Greek. Again, that's not a definitive argument. Of course, if you know me at all, you know that for me, the truth is about what is most likely true. There are plenty of people who apply their intellect to come up with fanciful possibilities. I'm not interested in the possible by and large. I'm interested in what's actually true. And so if we ask what is most likely true, the style in and of itself suggests that Paul is not likely the author. The theology is a little different from Paul's too, suggests that Paul is not the author. This here, could Paul have said that he received, yes, he does say that in 1 Corinthians 15 about receiving the tradition of the resurrection. So could Paul have said that he heard about salvation from others who'd heard it from Jesus? Sure, Paul could have said that. However, Paul does claim to be an apostle pretty strongly in other places. 1 Corinthians 9:1. Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen the Lord? And in Galatians 1. I want you to know the revelation that I've told you about, I received it not from humans, but from God directly. Paul makes a pretty good big deal in Galatians and 1 Corinthians that he is a first-hand witness to Jesus. So this would be unusual if it were Paul. Bottom line is, if we're interested in what's true, it's not at all likely that Hebrews was written by Paul. Could he have written it? Sure. And there is a scholar who wrote a book basically arguing it could have been Paul. But that is actually, there's only one card-carrying PhD expert in New Testament that I know that actually has made that argument. There hasn't been a scholar since the 1940s that I know of who has argued that Paul was the author of Hebrews. So basically, if you're interested in the truth, you're not going to go there. Now, you're welcome to try because maybe there's something that everybody else has missed. But again, I'm interested in what's true. I'm not interested in empty sentimentality. I want people to feel good about themselves. I want people to. I don't want anybody to lose their faith, obviously. But in the end, fanciful thinking only gets us into trouble in the long run. I'm interested in the cold brass tacks, what's likely, and it's just not likely that Paul wrote Hebrews. Verse 4. It was also confirmed, that is, This salvation, which was first spoken by Jesus, has also been witnessed, verse 4, together, God witnessing with both with signs and wonders and by various powers and distributions of the Holy Spirit according to his will. So the book of Hebrews, the author of Hebrews believes in signs and wonders and gives us clear evidence here that miracles have accompanied the progress of Christianity, that miracles were a known commodity in the early church, and that these miracles were a confirmation of that the salvation spoken of by Jesus was in fact true. Reminds me a little bit of the book of Acts. I mean, the book of Acts, and there have been some who've argued that Luke could have been the author of Hebrews. Certainly the style, from a stylistic standpoint, the Greek of Hebrews and the Greek of, say, Acts and Luke, they are comparable. I mean, they're comparable. And so stylistically, that would fit. I will say that there is a little bit of a difference, I think, between the theology of Hebrews and the theology of Luke, Acts in general. The theology in Acts that comes closest to Hebrews is the theology of Acts 7, where Stephen gives his sermon. And that the theology of Stephen is very similar to the theology of Hebrews. However, I would say that Stephen's sermon in general is an unusual sermon in the book of Acts. In other words, it doesn't seem to be the dominant theology of the book of Acts with regard to kind of a negativity toward the earthly temple. There is a negativity, I would say, in Acts 7 toward the earthly temple. Now, God does not dwell in buildings made by hands. That fits with Hebrews, but it doesn't fit Luke Acts, because in Luke Acts, the temple is a central feature of Luke Acts, very much valued within the story world of Luke Acts. Again, this doesn't prove that Luke didn't write Hebrews. It's just a reason why I have not gone that way. Okay, verse 5. So we have the exhortation in verses 2, 1 through 4. So we have teaching in Hebrews 1. We have an interruption with preaching in 2, 1 through 4. Exposition in Hebrews 1, exhortation in 2, 1 to 4. Now, when we get to verse 5, let the teaching continue. For not to angels has God subjected the coming oikumene, the coming world, the coming inhabited world, concerning which we are speaking. Now, you might remember back when we were looking at chapter 1, I think it's verse 6, Hebrews says, when he leads his firstborn into the oikumene, into the world, he says, let all the angels worship him. And I made the argument back in chapter 1 that the oikumene in mind in Hebrews 1 is in fact the heavenly oikumene. And you could argue for that here too. For not to angels did he subject the coming world, the coming oikumene. The coming world in Hebrews is a heavenly world. Now, I talked about having more or less been pushed to change my mind, I think, about there being a new creation. But that doesn't change the fact that the future orientation of Hebrews is very much a heavenly one. And we'll see this when we get to chapter 12. One of the reasons why for so many years I thought that the earthly realm was just destroyed was because Hebrews really orients everything salvific around heaven. And so I think, of course, of the book of Revelation, where the heavenly Jerusalem comes down to earth. So again, we don't want to mix Hebrews and Revelation in a forced kind of way, but that would be a way to fit these two ideas together, that the coming world is a heavenly world, and yet there's a new creation. Hebrews fits that fine, because in Hebrews there's a new heaven and a new earth, and the new heaven the heavenly Jerusalem comes down to the new earth. And so that would be a way of fitting together what we're saying here. But clearly, when he says that it's the coming world that will be subjected to Jesus, it's talking about what we call the eschatological world. It's not talking about the past world. Well, okay. So here's again the mention of angels, that angels are not going to be the ones ruling in the new age, in the new covenant. This again aligns angels with the old covenant, which is another reason why saying that Jesus is greater than the angels fits. It's of the same piece as saying that the new covenant is superior to the old covenant. It all fits together. 4, verse 6, someone witnesses somewhere saying, what is a human being that you remember them? Or the child of a human being that you visit them? Now, I went ahead and did plurals because really this is talking about humanity, not just about guys. You may know the male-oriented language of the older versions. What is man that you're mindful of him, the son of man that you visit him? But really, we're talking about both men and women here. And this is a quote from Psalm 8. Interesting that he says, someone somewhere says. Now, of course, most Jews, and we don't know for sure that the author of Hebrews is a Jew, but let's go ahead and say that would be the most likely possibility, of course. Any Jew or converted Jew or Christian Jew, so to speak, or Gentile Jew, Gentile who believed in Jesus, anybody would have thought that David wrote the Psalms. And this is true when we get to chapter 4, that the author of Hebrews understood David to be the author of Psalms. And so this someone somewhere is not, I can't remember who wrote this psalm. That's not what's going on here. I've argued that what's going on here is a sense of the Holy Spirit as being the true author of Scripture. And so the someone somewhere is just distancing the psalm from the human author, I think, even though I'm pretty sure the author of Hebrews would say, yeah, David was the hand that wrote this psalm down. The someone somewhere, I think, is suggesting that the author is divine, or the origin of the psalm is divine rather than human. By the way, I think this kind of expression is also found in Philo. And I'm known, and I probably people exaggerate my sense of the connection between Hebrews and Philo, but there are so many little kind of similarities between Hebrews and Philo. No one of them is definitive. No one of them is really substantial even. But the cumulative case, I've argued, I should probably publish it. There's a paper I gave a few years ago in which I argued that the cumulative case, I think, suggests that the author of Hebrews has echoes of Philo. And to me, this, of course, makes Apollos the most likely author of Hebrews, given what we know. Now, the thing is, we don't know gobs. We don't know so much that it's almost perilous to suggest something like Apollos being the author. Martin Luther suggested that Apollos might be the author of Hebrews. If I have to do a multiple choice test, and God only knows is not one of the options, but I have to pick a name. If you make me fall off the log, I'm going to fall off the log with Apollos, because of the cumulative case of superficial parallels. Anyway, I'm going to move on from there. We should not let that influence our sense of Hebrews, because we just don't know. That's the best answer. God only knows who the author of Hebrews is. But interestingly enough, the psalm here, and of course, I can go ahead and read the rest of the psalm. Verse 7, you made humanity a little lower than the angels, or maybe better translation, you made them lower than the angels for a little while. And then you crowned them with glory and honor, and appointed humanity over the works of your hands. Actually, I don't think that's in the original. That might be a interlinear Bible trace of the King James. Hold on a second. Yes, the parenthetical comment there is not likely to have been in the original of Hebrews. Very easy to explain how it arose in the manuscripts because it's there in the psalm. So somebody filling out the psalm. No reason for anybody to take it out. There is reason for someone to add it in. That's our basic train of thought. There's good manuscript evidence for it, but the argument, choose that reading which best explains how the others came about, that suggests this was not in the original of Hebrews, but was added in. But what was in the original of Hebrews is verse 8. You subjected all things under his feet. All right. So who's it talking about? The psalm is talking about humanity, right? But the train of thought could lead you to think this is talking about Jesus, right? It's not to angels that God has subjected the coming world, but Jesus. And it even says son of humanity, son of man there, right? Jesus is a son of man, right? Son of humanity. So I think that we're going to see that it does apply to Jesus, but again, I rankled over this in college, and after a lot of thought, I really think that the train of thought here, by the way, is very Pauline in a way. For to which of the angels, as he said, I'm sorry, but he witnesses somewhere, what is humanity that you are mindful of them? So I think the coming world has been subjected to humanity, not to angels. The coming world has been subjected to humanity, as the psalm says. The psalm says, you put everything under humanity's feet. And there's an inner logic here that is very Pauline. And even though I don't think the author of Hebrews was Paul, I do think that the author of Hebrews was somewhere in the Pauline sphere, someone in the Pauline realm. The train of thought here, and this helps us understand the logic of Romans as well. All have sinned and are lacking the glory of God. That's the best translation, I would say, of Romans 3:23. What is the inner logic here? Humanity was created to have a position of glory and honor in the creation. As Psalm 8 says, what is humanity? You've crowned humanity with glory and honor, and you've put everything under humanity's feet. That is what we were created to be. That is what humanity was meant to be in the beginning of Genesis. But as verse 8 says here, when he subjected to him all things, he left to him unsubjected nothing. But now, and here's the key word, now we do not yet see all things having been subjected to humanity. I'm trying to present the train of thought here. Humanity was created for glory and honor. Doesn't the Psalm say so? What is humanity? You crowned him with glory and honor. But we do not yet see, we do not yet see all things subjected to humanity. We have a problem here. Why? Because all have sinned and are lacking the glory of God. You see the logic here, both behind Paul and Hebrews. God created humanity, created humanity in his image, put humanity over the birds and over all creation. What is humanity? That you're mindful of them, you crowned them with glory and honor, but all have sinned and are lacking that glory, are lacking the glory of God. We do not yet see all things having been subjected to humanity. Everything was meant to be. When he subjected everything to humanity, he meant for nothing to be unsubjected to humanity, but we do not yet see everything having been subjected. We have a problem here on the earth. God has created humanity to be crowned with glory and honor, but they don't have glory and honor. Send in Jesus. I love the word order of verse 9 here. But for a little while, then the angels having been lowered, we see, dun, 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 Jesus. Jesus came in to solve the human problem. Humanity was created for glory and honor, but all have sinned and are lacking the glory of God. We do not yet see all things put under their feet. Call in Jesus. Send in Jesus. Okay, Jesus, we're going to make you a little lower than the angels. We're going to make you, or better yet, we're going to make you lower than the angels for a little while. And then, when it's all done, when you've made a cleansing for sin, when you have ascended and you have been seated at the right hand of God, when you are enthroned, you will have become as much greater than the angels as the name that you have inherited is greater than them. You will be crowned Son of God, King and Lord. You see the train of thought here? It all fits together in chapters 1 and 2. The story, let me tell you the story of humanity. God created humanity. He made everything very good. He made humanity in his image. He gave humanity dominion. In fact, that's what the image of God really is inductively in Genesis 1. It is the dominion of humanity over creation. Psalm 8, what is humanity that you would think this? You made them lower than the angels, for a little while. You crowned humanity with glory and honor. You put everything under their feet, but all have sinned and are lacking the glory and honor of God that God intended them to have. We do not yet see everything under their feet. Call in Jesus, who is made like them, who becomes lower than the angels for a little while. And then he makes a purification for sins and is seated at the right hand of majesty in the heavens, is enthroned as king, dun, 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 having become as much greater than the angels. He came lower than the angels for a little while, but now he is much greater than the angels. It all fits together. This is the inner logic of the argument here. And so, but for a little while, having been made lower than the angels, we see Jesus, on account of the suffering of death, having been crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death on behalf of everyone. Death was a consequence of the fall, right? All have sinned and are lacking the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. But Jesus troubleshooted the human problem that by the grace of God, he might taste death on behalf of all of us. Verse 10, for it was fitting for him, because of whom all things were made, and through whom all things were made, in leading many sons to glory. See, he's leading us to glory. All have sinned and are lacking the glory of God, but God through Jesus is leading us to glory, so that we don't have to taste death anymore. It was fitting to make the leader, the archetype, the archegos, the leader of our salvation, of their salvation, to perfect him through sufferings. And so Jesus came, he went through the problem, he solved the sin problem by troubleshooting the human problem, by becoming human, and by living a life without sin. And he therefore can now taste death for us, so that we don't have to taste eternal death, and he can lead many children to glory, the glory that humanity was intended to have. It all fits, the logic all fits. So Psalm 8 in Hebrews 2 is not just about Jesus. It's about Jesus as the perfect human. It's about Jesus as what we call the last Adam. The first Adam messed us up, but the last Adam is leading many sons to the glory that and women and daughters that we were meant to have. And he does this through sufferings. He is perfected through sufferings. Now, perfection in Hebrews doesn't mean that Jesus was morally imperfect before, or he was somehow less than good or anything like that. Perfection here is he's locked and loaded as high priest. So he's just not ready. It's like, when you first get it's the first thing that came to my mind. When you get a new computer or electronic device, a lot of times, you have to get it fully charged first, get it charged all the way before you used it. First, you drain it all the way, then you charge it all the way so that you have the full capacity of the battery. Jesus is not fully charged until the cross. And we're going to see this later on in Hebrews as well. He is not completed yet. And the word perfect has a sense of completion. Jesus is not completed as our high priest until he has died for sins. And so he is completed to serve as our high priest, to serve as our leader of salvation. He is not ready to serve as the leader of salvation until he's gone through the sufferings. until he's gone through the cross. But once he has gone through the sufferings, he is complete. He is now perfected. He's locked and loaded for salvation, which is an odd imagery, I know, but it somehow, I think, helps communicate in my mind what we're talking about. Jesus is not ready to serve as the author of salvation until he has suffered and died for our sins, until he has tasted death for everyone. And then he is crowned with glory, and he can lead us to glory. By the way, I mentioned also in chapter 1 that God here is the one through whom all things. So what is said of Jesus in 1:3 or 1:2, through whom also he made the worlds, is here said of God the Father, through whom all things, were made. So there is this ambiguity, I think, in whether Hebrews is speaking literally when it talks about Jesus as the agent of creation. But again, you see the previous videos here. All right, so we get to verse 11. For both the one who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are from one source, are from one Father. It doesn't say from one what, but they come from the same stock, so to speak. Sanctifying, of course, means to make holy. And this is what Jesus does through the cross. He purifies us. He makes us holy. He makes us gods. He puts us on the divine side of the property line. Both the one who is making us holy and those who are being made holy, they're both from one. Jesus is human. Jesus fully identified with us. Jesus fully became human. He was not a demigod like Hercules. He was fully God, from whom all from whom are, like I say, all are from one stock, all are from one source, all are from one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. We are co-heirs with Jesus. We are of the same stock. We are human. He is human. He is not different from us in his humanity at all. His humanity is our humanity. And now, of course, Hebrews uses some Old Testament quotes to confirm this, saying, I will announce your name to my brothers and sisters. In the middle of the assembly, I will sing your praises. And again, I will put my trust in God, in him. And again, behold, I and the children that God has given to me. I use this format in chapter 1 to argue that Hebrews 1, 5, and 6 are all talking about the same thing. This I say and again, because Hebrews does that kind of structure in chapter 1. These all three go together. They're taken from different places in Scripture, of course. I think one of them is taken from Psalm 116. And then I think one of them is taken from Isaiah, maybe chapter 7 or 8. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my screen here. Sorry, it's not Psalm 116, it's Psalm 22 and Isaiah chapter 8 that is quoting here. But again, all of these quotes have to do with the solidarity of Jesus with humanity, that we are Jesus's brothers and sisters. And of course, the word assembly is the word for church also. And he has showed us the way to put our trust in God the Father. The faith of Jesus Christ is a model for us, which is kind of a foreign concept, I think, sometimes to Christians, that Jesus would trust in God or that Jesus would have faith. But when we get to Romans and maybe Galatians, we'll see that this is a category for the early church, arguably, that Jesus had faith in God and that we should model our faith on his faith. Verse 14 is a very important incarnation verse for Hebrews. Therefore, since the children have partaken of blood and flesh, he himself also similarly partook of them, in order that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil. Verse 14 is both we have indication that Jesus fully took on our flesh and blood. So again, Hebrews is not Gnostic, and that this was significant in destroying the one who had the power over death. He tasted death for everyone. And in doing that, he beat the one who has the power of death. That is the devil. This is the clearest verse in what we might call the Christus Victor theory of atonement, that Jesus wins theory of atonement, that Jesus beats the devil and beats death, and therefore we can beat death and we can beat the devil as well. And so that this verse is a key verse for the defeat of the devil. There are a number of places, and I've written a book called Understanding the Book of Hebrews. Wrote it 15 years ago. I have a page there in which I point out parallels between the book of Hebrews and a intertestamental book called the Book of Wisdom, which Paul may also know in Romans 1. And there are a number of parallels also between Hebrews and the Book of Wisdom, which again, the Book of Wisdom probably comes from Alexandria, where Apollos came from. Again, not a knockdown, drag out argument, but it's a cumulative kind of, this is very interesting, the parallels between Hebrews and what we can imagine Apollos to have been like. Don't know for sure, of course. But Hebrews has wisdom, the Book of Wisdom, which is, by the way, in the Roman Catholic Old Testament, has a verse that's a little bit reminiscent of this as well, one of the many parallels. And by doing this, verse 15, and he might exchange these who, as many as who, because of the fear of death through their whole life, were subject to slavery. But we are not subject to slavery. Again, themes that are similar to Paul here. But we are now free. We are children of God. Verse 16, for indeed not is he helping angels, but he is helping the seed of Abraham. And by seed of Abraham here, I think Hebrews means all Christians, both Gentiles and Jews. This is a rather startling thing to say, but it might suggest that Hebrews is a little later than Paul, where the inclusion of the Gentiles is no longer an issue. Or I actually wonder if Hebrews was written to Gentiles. We'll get to that in a later chapter, where the hints of that might be. Your initial thought, well, how could this be to Gentiles? Because it's so Jewish, this document. Well, anybody who came to, I'm not a Jew, and I'm reading Hebrews. Any Gentile who came to Christ in the first century would have become enculturated in the scriptures. So I don't think that's a good argument. This verse 16 is sometimes an argument. An argument has sometimes been made from verse 16 that some may have thought that Jesus was an angel, and an angelophany or something like that. But I don't know whether that holds water, but the train of thought is that if he was trying to help angels, he might have become an angel. But he's not trying to help angels. He became a human being. He's trying to help the seed of Abraham. This is a little bit of a bizarre verse. Why would it be about him helping angels? What's going on here? So it is at least possible that there were some Jews who thought, well, maybe Jesus was an angel. But this makes it clear that Jesus did not come as an angel. Jesus came as a human being. Verse 17, some think that verse 17 and 18 are the key verses of Hebrews. And so let's read these, because they do, in a sense, they are a kind of general statement that does seem to be played out a little bit in the rest of the book. So one way or another, verse 17 and 18 are important verses in Hebrews. Therefore, it benefited him to be made like his brothers and all of his brothers in every way, like his brothers and sisters, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest with regards to the things of God, in order that he might atone for the sins of the people. So here we have the first statement in Hebrews that Jesus is a high priest. Now, Hebrews isn't going to build it here. Hebrews kind of just drops that there. He'll pick it up again later on in the book of Hebrews. But here's the first place where we hear about Jesus being a high priest, and he becomes like us so that he can be our high priest, so that he can serve as our high priest. He's not here to atone for the sins of of angels. He is here to atone for the sins of people. And he became a merciful and faithful high priest with regard to the things of God. in order that he might atone for the sins of the people. This word hilaskomai is not used very many times, 3 times, I think, in the New Testament, here and in Romans 3, and I think in 1 John, if I'm remembering correctly. Um, what exactly it means, it certainly means to make atonement. Whether it means propitiation, I think the evidence is not strong enough to say propitiation. It maybe. I just don't think that we have strong enough evidence to go that far. It clearly is about atonement. It's clearly about covering the sins of the people. I'm going to just leave it as a generic reference to atonement. Verse 18, for in that he himself has suffered, having been tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. He is a high priest, as Hebrews will say in chapter 4, who has been tempted in every way like we are, although he was without sin. Jesus can help us because he's been there. I actually was in a Sunday school class this morning where someone was pointing out that the word used in John 14:1, don't let your hearts be troubled, that Jesus says to the disciples, is used of Jesus 3 times earlier in the Gospel of John. His heart is troubled as he faces his death on the cross. His heart is troubled at the Last Supper. His heart is troubled when he sees that Lazarus is dead. Jesus experienced our troubles and our being troubled, but his choices were to endure. And that's what the author of Hebrews is saying to the audience, that be like Jesus. So you're facing a hard time. And the audience of Hebrews was no doubt facing a troubling time. Hebrews says Jesus was tempted and tested like you too. Jesus went through it too, but he was faithful. He endured through it all, and he's able to help you when you are tempted and when you are tested. So keep going. Keep running the race. Run with patience, Hebrews 12:1, the race that is set before you. This is not just theology out in the blue, pie in the sky. This is practical theology. You can endure because Jesus endured. Jesus is a faithful high priest who's been tested like you, and he made it. You can make it too. That is the underlying point, I think, here in verse 18. Well, this has been Hebrews chapter 2, and you've heard it here on my weekly podcast, Through the Bible in 10 Years, Hebrews chapter 2.